Today, I finally gave my miter saw a proper home. This compact miter saw station is perfect for small shops, but it could extend up to 14 feet for cutting those super long boards. It's loaded with great features, but my favorite is this new stop block that I designed. It's rock solid, slides completely out of the way when you don't need it, and then locks right back into position so every cut is dead on accurate. All right, let's jump right into the build. You'll need 2 full sheets of plywood for this cart, and I'll have plans available on my website which will clearly list all the cuts you need to make. Just make sure to label your plywood before cutting it up to keep everything nice and organized. I chopped up these sheets by using the table saw, track saw, and miter saw. I make sure to mark each piece as I cut them on my paper plans to keep track of everything, and I could prepare all the parts for assembly. I designed the main compartment to have a shelf, so I drilled for the shelf pin holes, and then I drilled pocket holes on all the sides. I figured I wanted to keep the construction of this cart as simple as possible so anyone could build it for their own shop. When assembling with pocket holes, the most important thing is to make sure the 2 parts you're connecting are clamped really well before driving the screws. So I attached both sides of the bottom panel with pocket hole screws by clamping them in position, then flip the assembly over and attach the top to both the sides. Again, making sure to clamp these really well before driving in the screws. Now, this next step is not required. I decided I wanted to inset a 1/2-inch piece of plywood for the back of this cart because I felt like it would make it sturdier when I have to roll it around. But I feel like just tacking a 1/4-inch piece of ply to the back would work fine. So if you don't want to use a router, you don't have to, but I like routers and router jigs, so that's what I did. Making this rabbet also gives me an opportunity to use this corner chisel that I rarely get to use, and it's fun. But again, I think it would be fine without this. All right, moving right along, I wouldn't have been able to cut that rabbet with the middle panel in place, so I install it now using spacers on either side to make sure it's perfectly located. And now I can install the back. The middle panel that I just installed also had to be smaller than the width of the side panels in order for this back panel to be inset. I had to cut off a 1/2 inch to make room for the 1/2-inch panel that's sitting in a 1/2-inch deep rabbet. The main cabinet is basically done. Super simple. Moving on to the base. This is a mobile miter saw cart, but I don't really want it to look like a cart. I want it to look like a piece of shop furniture. So I made a little bit of a fancy base by cutting some angled legs into the plywood strips. Then simply use pocket hole screws again to attach them all together. So really not that fancy. I felt like it needed a bit more support, so I used the cutoff from making the shape of the base to make a center support that I screwed into the middle with pocket holes as well. Now, I'm going to use these really cool hidden pop-up casters that I used on my drill press cart, but they need some extra blocking on the inside corners of all the legs. So I cut 4 of these mitered corner blocks and pre-drilled some holes at an angle at the drill press. Then I tacked them into the corners to keep them steady as I drove in some screws to lock them in position. And the base can now be screwed to the underside of the cabinet with pocket holes that I drilled out before assembling it. When I was building my drill press cart, I did not make these angle brackets for those casters, and it caused problems. So, lesson learned, now these were super easy to install, and once I flip it over, you can see how easy it is for these casters to deploy. Just lift the cabinet about 1 inch off the ground and they pop up, making it easy to roll the cabinet around. Lift again, and they disappear, leaving a sturdy work surface. All the rest of the parts will be cut based on the dimension of my actual miter saw. So I put it on top, put the dust extractor inside, and set it in position. I'm going with an offset placement of my saw because I found that works best for me. So I placed it where I wanted it and began marking out all the dust collection and electrical pass-throughs by making sure the saw's movement wouldn't get in the way. Then drilled the holes. One for the miter saw power cable that would be plugged into the dust extractor, and a larger hole for the dust extractor hose, which I cut using a jigsaw. But I wasn't happy with how the cut looked, so I 3D printed a template to the exact size I needed to clean it up. Using just a jigsaw is totally fine. If you're making this for yourself, no one's looking at it but you. Next, a hole gets drilled in the back of the cabinet for the dust extractor's power cable, and then I could figure out this dust hose situation. To get maximum efficiency out of the dust extractor, the hose needs to be as short as possible, and Festool doesn't make short hoses, so I bought a less expensive hose that I can cut. I moved the saw in every possible position, making sure the hose would extend all the way, and snipped it to length. I did a ton of research on this small little detail here and found this coupling sleeve that allows a third-party 35mm hose to work with Festool tools, and this worked perfectly. Okay, that was a little saw specific, but for the support platforms, you're going to need to use the dimensions of your own saw to get these at the right height. And you can do this without taking any measurements. It took me 3 tries to get a piece that would fit perfectly under the straight edge, but once the table saw was set, I cut all the supports to that height. That support platform is just dry fit for now, but I want to get the location for the T-track that will hold the stop block before I assemble it, and I'm able to get this location without measuring again. I put my brand new slide stop into the T-track and slide it so it's in the back position. Then I use a straight edge to push the stop block back until the straight edge hits the fence of my miter saw. Now I move the whole T-track back about 1/8 or so, just to be sure the stop will never interfere with any boards you set down. Mark the track location and cut a groove into the boards using a router with an edge guide. You can also use a dado stack or a single blade by taking multiple passes on the table saw. I set the bit depth so the T-track would be like a hair taller than the plywood it's sitting in. I felt like this would just help the stop glide across it more easily, and it works great. Now I can assemble these support platforms using pocket holes. I just made sure to avoid that groove so no screws would get in the way. Now these simply get screwed to the top through the underside of the cabinet, but there was one oversight in my design. I couldn't screw straight into the piece that was all the way to the left because it was blocked by the side of the cabinet. My bad, but this was actually a really easy fix. I just swapped out the screw that was holding the side panel to the top with a longer screw so it was going through both parts. Problem solved. Now for the extension wings. These will be folded down most of the time, but I want to be able to use my stop block when they're in use. So I made the same groove on both extension wing tops. In hindsight, I probably should have made this groove on the support platform tops and these parts at the same time and then cut them to length. But thankfully I didn't change the setup on my router jig, so I was able to cut these grooves in the same exact location on all parts. These extension wings will be able to extend even further with some built-in extension arms that are designed to run between 2 supports. So in total, each wing will require 6 of these long pieces, and I use their actual measurements to get the dimensions of the short cross support pieces that will fit between them. And then I can work on the extension arms, one of which will get some T-track installed in the front. I already had the bit that makes the perfect size groove for the T-track in my trim router, but for those long skinny parts, I felt like it would be safer to use a router table. So I quickly transformed my 6-in-1 router jig into a router table, and this time I set the bit so it would create a groove that was like a hair deeper than the thickness of the T-track, so it would be fully seated and won't get in the way when I extend the arms. To assemble all these parts, I'm going with pocket holes again because they're quick, simple, and they work. The order of operations to assemble these is pretty important. I placed the top of the wing, the part with the T-track groove, face down on my bench. Then took one of those long supports and clamped it to a straight edge before clamping it down to the underside of the extension top. This ensures that the front long support is actually straight as it's being screwed to the top, which will help the extension arm slide easier when this is all together. Then I repeated the same thing to the long support for the backside. To get the correct location for the second long support that will help guide the extension arm, I placed some painter's tape on the actual extension arm that will go there and very, very, very lightly clamped all those parts together before locking it down with screws. It's a snug fit there with the tape on, but once I take it off, it slides in and out super smoothly. I repeated this process on all 4 edges of the wings, then screwed the shorter supports in place. Again, making sure no screws would poke through that groove in the top. Now I can close it all up. I put the bottom piece in position, marked out where all the supports were, then countersunk a bunch of holes and locked it all together with screws. I cut all the inner supports and extension arms at the same time, so they're all exactly the same height. But in order for the extension arms to slide easily, I needed to shave off just a teeny tiny little bit off their height, kind of like what I did with the painter's tape a second ago, and now they slide in and out perfectly. Time for the T-track. Did not think that my first cuts on my new miter saw stand would be aluminum, but here we are. I cut them to length and installed them into the support platforms, the extension wings, and the front extension arms. Like me, you might run into a problem where the shortest screws you have poke through the back of these arms, which would really prevent them from moving like they should. But no big deal, you can just file off the tips and it'll be fine. To ensure they slide super smoothly though, I applied some liquid gold to them, but any wax should do. The purpose of this T-track in the front extension is to give you the ability to lock it in position. My original plan was to drill a hole for this bolt before assembly and then install it through the hole before I locked everything in place. But I forgot that that was my plan. So on to plan B, which I actually think is better. I drilled a hole where I wanted the notch to stop. Then using edge guides on the bottom of my router base plate, I kept plunging down until a notch was created. But there was something else I didn't think about. I had placed a screw in that corner coming up from the underside. Aside from the little scare those sparks gave me, this was no big deal. I just took out the screw and finished the cut. Now the bolt with the knob can slide into that notch, and the best part here, I can put the screw back in, and that screw acts as a stop to prevent the bolt from falling out. This was actually way better than my original plan of having the bolt permanently in there, and I love that this screw location creates a lock. I could not have planned it any better myself. Those extension arms will be attached to this extension face that will pull them in and out. I figured I could make it easier to grab and pull out by making this little recess on the inside, so I used my draw pull jig to make one. This isn't a necessary step, but I think it'll work pretty well. Now that face can be screwed to the extension arms through countersunk holes that I carefully marked out to line up with the arms, and time to test it out. I was a bit nervous that something would bind up and these wouldn't run smoothly, but this worked out perfectly. I was so excited about this. Time to get those wings installed on the cabinet. Keeping it simple here, I'll use these 20-inch heavy-duty folding shelf brackets. To get them installed at the correct height, I cut a spacer to the exact width of the extension wings and double side taped that so it was flush with the top of the support installed on the cabinet. Then I simply screwed them in place. To make sure the extension wing will be installed in the correct location on those arms, I used the square reference ledge of my slide stop. I pressed the ledge into both tracks and then locked it in position with both knobs. Now I can screw the wings down, knowing those two tracks will always line up right next to each other, and I could test to see if they were level. Perfect. Awesome. These wings are so easy to open and close. I even got a thumbs up for my little guy. Just a few more details, like the front doors, which was really exciting that I could cut them using the stop lock in the wing, and off camera I installed the hardware and then installed them into the cabinet. I completely forgot to order door pulls for these, so I 3D printed some. Also off camera, I cut the inner shelf to size and put that in there. So the extension arms do double duty. They're there to support super long pieces and to act as a stop lock on those long pieces. So I 3D printed this tab that gets screwed in through an offset hole. Then when in the down position, it doesn't get in the way of anything you put on there. But when you're cutting super long pieces, you can flip it to the up position and use it as a stop lock at whatever length you need. That's why it was so important to add that T-track and knob to the front extension arms, so I can lock a stop in place. I replaced a chewed up zero clearance insert that I 3D printed as well. Not my file, but I'll share a link down below, and could work on improving the dust collection a little bit more. I cut 3 pieces of 1/2-inch plywood so it surrounds the saw and screwed them together to make a 3-sided box. I've been loving the magnetic dust collection fittings that I have set up all around my shop, so I altered the print file on those to make a flat version that I can screw to the side of this box. All I needed to do was cut out a hole the same size as the opening, then install a backing to this box. I'm sure I'll want to make tweaks to this setup, so I didn't want to permanently attach it to the top. This cart is also mobile, so if I move it around, like take it outside, I don't need this dust collection box. So I glued little tabs on the bottom of the sides. Then when it's placed around the saw like I want it, I locked it in position using these little tabs that I designed and 3D printed. Then I screwed the magnetic dust collection adapter in place, which is very satisfying to click on and off. Now I can lift up on those casters and set it down to its permanent home. To make sure my cuts are as accurate as possible, I'll add a tape measure along the T-track. So I cut a piece to a known length with the stop block locked in position. Then used a square to mark the edge of the stop block so I could take it off, and then use that line on that known measurement to make sure the tape is perfectly placed. This tape is super thin and doesn't interfere with the stop block, but if I would have thought about this earlier in the build, I probably would have routed a super shallow groove in the plywood so I can install it in front of the T-track instead of behind it. For those little cubbies, I 3D printed some baskets that fit perfectly, and the one over to the right is extra special. I basically just designed this small support so I could store all my pencils in here. The back part of this small support is also the perfect spot to keep my tape. Love it. I'm so happy with how this turned out. This is the perfect solution for my shop. It's small enough that I'm able to walk around and maneuver around all my other tools, but when I need it to be bigger, it's huge, like bigger than I would probably ever need it to be. When designing this, I thought of how I use the miter saw. So I really only use the left side of the blade. So by offsetting the saw to the right side, I'm able to get a really decently sized platform that's like always here, ready to go when I'm in the middle of a project. But when I do need it for those longer pieces, it's super easy to lift up the wings. Let's talk about the stop for a second. I knew that I didn't want a fence for my miter saw station because I don't really think that they're necessary. My saw is set up to cut square when a piece of wood is pushed up against the fence. So I always use the actual saw's fence as my reference for cutting square. Now there are a few stops that you can get that work with the fenceless miter saw station that flip up out of the way. I bought one and I was not happy with the deflection that I was getting with it, so I designed this. The slide stop. See here when I lock down on the knob, the stop is locked into those wedges, so it's virtually impossible to move when it's locked down. I probably won't be bashing it with a mallet when I'm working, but it's great to know that it will not budge if I ever smack it really hard by accident. And the sliding is cool, but why do I need it to slide? Usually this comes in handy when you need to square up both ends of a board, so you set your stop to your desired length. Make your cut on one end, making sure it's just longer than where the stop is set. Then slide the stop back to the front, lock it down, flip your board around and make your second cut, bringing your board to final length with both sides square. Or if you're working on a project and you have the stop dialed in to cut the perfect length for multiple parts, and then for some reason you have to cut a longer piece. So all you have to do is slide the stop back, make your cut, then slide it forward, and it's dialed in to make the perfect length for the project that you're working on. Or you can set up multiple stops if you're working on a project that requires a bunch of different lengths. I designed this so it's compatible with all different size T-tracks. On the underside, there is a squaring ledge. Once in position, use slight pressure to nudge the base up against the squaring ledge and lock it down. And with just this one knob tightened, the base of the stop is completely locked in position. The way that I have this set up here with the tape measure on this side of the T-track, this stop is running along the millimeter part of it. So maybe this is a sign for me to go metric, but I could still eyeball the freedom units up here. Let's go 20 inches, lock down the base, lock down the stop, and make the cut. All right, let's see. 20 inches. Perfect. Now, if I want to make a cut longer than 20 inches, just slide the stop back and make the cut. I'm really proud of this design and I'm really excited to use it at the miter saw, but I also see it really coming in handy at the router table. My router table fence has a T-track on the fence, so this would be a perfect solution for doing stopped cuts instead of drawing pencil lines like I used to. Again, slide it up when you don't need it to work on other parts, then slide it back down to get back to that perfect setup. I'm sure I'll find some more uses for it as I start working on some more projects, and I can't wait to see what you guys come up with too. The stop is made of 2 pieces of solid aluminum, and as you can see, it's not just my logo on there. Jonathan's KM Tools logo is on there as well because he'll be producing these for me. So the quality you guys know and love from all your KM Tools is right here in this cool little stop. We're doing a limited run of these initially, so I don't know how long they'll be in stock for. I'll leave all the updated information in the video description and the pinned comment. Now back to details about the miter saw station. For the extension wing, I considered trying to figure out how to use the slide stop as the stop for here, but the flag stop is just such a simple solution, and you don't need to 3D print this. You can make this out of wood, but I love that I'm able to lock this position there, so I'm able to get accurate repeatability on super long boards. And the lock for the knob with the screw there, that was like a super genius move on my part. In the end, these wings were completely flat, but just a word of caution if you're planning on using these folding shelf brackets that I used. When I first installed them, the wing was like tilted up this way. It was like off by a little bit, which would prevent any boards from being able to lay flat, and that would prevent the squareness of my cuts. So I needed to install like a 1/16 inch spacer just at the top of the brackets here. And that like brought the wing like this way a little bit, and then I was able to get it completely flat. So just be aware of that if you are going to use these. You get what you pay for with them. I also see people build their miter saw stations a little bit deeper. Like they build it all the way out to here, and then they have to make cutouts in these support shelves over here to make room for the rotation of the saw. But I really don't think that's necessary to make it any deeper. It gives me like an extra 4 inches of space to walk around. I don't have to make those cutouts, and I have a full range of motion of the saw. So I think people maybe think they need to build it out to have support for super wide pieces, but here's a super wide piece that's wider than the saw, and it's fully supported. And even if it wasn't, there's always the clamp. All right, what else? The cabinet. I chose to just do one big cabinet, but I think this would be a great opportunity to fill this up with some drawers. I also chose not to edge band all the fronts because I just don't think that it's necessary for shop projects, but you do you. For these cubbies, I also forgot to install a back in there, so I just glued in a little stopper, and now these stop in place. I also added these handles on the sides to help me lift the cabinet up to deploy the casters, and I love these casters. It's so great that I can easily move this around my shop or outside if I need to. With these 3D printed locking tabs, I'm also able to remove the dust hood and then place it right back in position when I need to, which I think is pretty cool. I haven't really done a test to see if this dust hood works, so let's do that. I'll vacuum everything out, so we're starting with a clean slate. Then I'll make 10 cuts without the extra dust port connected. Notice the dust. Yes, the Capex still produces dust, even with the dust extractor and the short hose. It's a miter saw, that's to be expected, but most of the dust is contained within the box, which is nice. Now we'll do another 10 cuts with the larger dust collection turned on. Let's see. There's definitely still some dust in there, but I see that it's being pulled towards this direction, which is a good start. I knew that I was going to have to make changes. That's why I built it the way that I did. But I think I'm just going to get some ducting to get me closer to the back of the blade, like closer to the source of the dust. This is just a great connecting point from the outside that'll get me closer to the source of the dust inside. But I'll get to that next week when I have some more time. So this was a long time coming. I had no idea where I wanted my miter saw in the shop. It just kept moving around to a bunch of different places, but I'm really glad that I waited to build this because I think this is the perfect solution for me in my shop. And I hope you guys found something that could be useful for you and yours. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one where I build something on my new miter saw station.